Ever wonder why some countries seem to be bursting with people while others are worried about shrinking? Well, what if I told you there's a predictable pattern that explains it all? It's called the demographic transition model, and it's basically the key to understanding how our world's population changes. So let's dive in.
You see it in the headlines constantly, right? Population explosions here, population decline over there. And it seems like a total contradiction, but it's really not. There's actually a single story, a single framework that connects these two extremes and explains what's going on.
And that framework is the demographic transition model, or DTM for short. The best way to think about it is like a map. It shows us the journey a country's population takes, step by step, as it develops from an agricultural society to an industrial one.
Okay, so this journey we're about to take, it's broken down into 5 clear stages. We're going to walk through every single one, starting from way back in history all the way to a future that honestly a lot of developed countries are already starting to see. This is our roadmap.
But what's the engine behind all this change? What actually pushes a country from one stage to the next? Well, it all comes down to these huge societal shifts. The big 3 are, first, the agricultural revolution, which set the whole thing in motion. Then, the Industrial Revolution, which just hit the accelerator. And finally, the Medical Revolution, which completely changed the game on how long we all live.
So let's start at the beginning. Stage 1. For almost all of human history, this was it. This was reality, a kind of natural balance, but a really, really harsh one.
So picture this. You've got super high birth rates, but they're basically canceled out by equally high death rates. You know, things like famine, disease, war, they were just a constant part of life. So even with a lot of babies being born, the total population barely grew at all. It was stuck.
And this is a really crucial point to get about stage 1. Nobody is in it anymore. Not a single country on Earth. It's now purely a historical benchmark, something we use to measure how far we've come.
All right, now for the drama. Stage 2 is where everything changes. This is the moment we see the start of that massive population growth that has pretty much defined our modern world.
So here's what happens. The birth rate stays really high, right? That's just a cultural holdover from stage 1. But all of a sudden, the death rate absolutely plummets. And it's that huge widening gap between births and deaths that creates a population explosion. This is the stage that really sparked those old fears about a population bomb, the idea that we'd run out of food.
So why did the death rate drop so fast? Well, it was this perfect storm of innovation, better farming and more food from the Industrial Revolution, things we take for granted now, like basic sanitation and clean water, which stopped diseases from spreading, and of course, the beginnings of modern medicine.
And listen, this isn't just ancient history. This is the reality today for many parts of the world. The fastest growing countries, places like Niger, Nigeria, Afghanistan, they're all right in the middle of this stage 2 expansion.
Okay, so after that massive explosion, things start to change. We enter stage 3, which is all about the big slowdown. This is where society starts to catch up and adapt to this new reality. The big story in stage 3 is that the birth rate finally starts to drop. It starts to fall towards that already low death rate. So that huge gap from stage 2, it starts to narrow. The population is still growing, for sure, but the pace is cooling off significantly. And why does this happen? Well, it all comes down to huge changes in how people live. As more people move to cities, there's just less economic need for large families to work on a farm. And this is so important. As women get more access to education and jobs, family sizes naturally get smaller. This is the reality for a lot of the world's biggest emerging economies right now. Countries like India, Mexico, South Africa, Brazil, they're all in the middle of this stage 3 transition, managing this slowing but still significant growth. So where does this all lead? Well, eventually you land in stage 4. This is a whole new kind of stability, and it's pretty much the reality for most of the developed world today. Now, this stage is interesting because at first glance it looks a lot like stage 1, a stable population, but the reality couldn't be more different. Now, both birth rates and death rates are low. The population is leveled off, but at a way higher number and with a much, much better quality of life. But this new stability comes with its own brand new challenge. With fewer kids being born and people living longer than ever, the population as a whole gets older. This leads to what's called a higher dependency ratio, which basically means you have fewer working-age people trying to support a growing number of retirees. And that puts a huge strain on things like pensions and healthcare. And this is the situation for most highly developed countries. We're talking about the United States, Canada, Australia, and pretty much all of Western Europe. They're all dealing with the economic consequences of being in stage 4.
And that takes us to our final stop on this journey, the fifth and most recent stage. This is a step into completely uncharted territory for humanity. We're talking about population decline.
This is pretty mind-blowing. For the first time ever on a wide scale, the birth rate actually drops below the death rate. People are still living long, healthy lives, but there just aren't enough babies being born to replace the older generations. The result? The population actually starts to shrink. And this quote here really nails the why behind it. In these super advanced economies, the high cost of living, combined with more career opportunities, especially for women, just pushes birth rates way down. They fall below what's called the replacement level, which is about 2.1 children per woman. So this decline isn't an accident. It's a direct result of modern life in places like Japan, Germany, and Italy.
All right, so let's zoom out and just recap the whole journey we've been on. This table lays it all out. You can see the whole story right here. You start in stage 1 with high births and high deaths, totally balanced. Then stage 2, the death rate drops and the population explodes. In stage 3, the birth rate starts to fall and growth slows. Stage 4, everything levels out at a low, stable rate. And then, possibly stage 5, where the birth rate drops so low that the population begins to shrink.
And that, right there, leaves us with a really big, kind of mind-blowing question for the future. For our entire modern history, we've only known a world of population growth. So as more and more countries tip into stage 5, we have to ask ourselves, what does a world with fewer people actually look like? What happens to our economies that are built on the idea of constant growth? What happens to the balance of power? That's the huge question this model forces us to think about.